FDC3 Quarterly General Meeting on the 7th of November. We'll start with the meeting notices, which are that FINOS project leads are responsible for observing the FINOS guidelines for running project meetings. All of the participants in FINOS project meetings subject to the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and FINOS Community Code of Conduct and all other FINOS policies. And FINOS meetings generally involve participation by industry competitors, and it's the intention of FINOS and the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with applicable antitrust and competition laws. It's therefore extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable US state, federal or foreign antitrust and competition laws. FINOS project meetings may be recorded. This is usually solely for use by the FINOS team for admin purposes. In very limited instances, including this one, and with explicit approval, recordings may be made more widely available. The general meeting serves as an update of activity in FDC3 over the previous quarter and plans for the next quarter. So it is one that we record and distribute. Hence, we will be distributing the presentation section. If we have time for the Q&A section at the end, we will stop the recording for that. So please do hold any questions or contributions to the end of the session. Look, so can you confirm we're recording? Rob, I think I've restarted it.
Yeah, it says recording for me. Yeah,
I can't see when I'm showing the screen so easily. So if you haven't done so yet, please do add your name and affiliation to issue 1098. That's 1098, which is today's agenda, and will help our colleagues at FINOS record attendance and engagement with the community with FDC3. And on today's agenda, we're going to cover a set of announcements. Lots of new things have happened since our last meeting. Some content on what's next for FDC3. I think I've got timings slightly off here, but it'll be a little bit longer than that. So the upcoming meetings for discussion groups, which are feeding into the next set of changes in FDC3, the next version, as well as some smaller issues that are going through the standards working group, and some contributions we've got of bindings for FDC3 for other languages. So a little bit more on that. And then we'll cover how you can get involved, so upcoming meetings, and also recruiting, as we always are, for more maintainers, editors, and participants, so contributors to the FDC3 standard. Then if we've got time, we'll make some space for a Q&A session for any open questions you've got about anything that's going on at FDC3. That will not be recorded or distributed. So we'll start with the announcements, where I am going to hand you straight over to Rob Moffat, who can tell us a little bit more about the FDC3 training courses and FINOS certified FDC3 practitioner exam.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so last week it was OSFF in New York on the 1st of November. One of the reasons I've got a bad voice today, I think, still suffering from the illnesses associated with communicating with 700 people on a day. So anyway, we launched, earlier in the year we launched Introduction to FDC3, LFEL 1000, which is our free express learning course with the Linux Foundation. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to take that and then share their badges on LinkedIn. Really nice, simple introduction to FDC3, explaining what's going on. We've now released at OSFF this advanced developer course, which actually takes you through building a whole sort of suite of interoperating FDC3 applications using FDC3 Sail. You can use what you like, actually. If you want to use Finsomble or Glue or something, you could probably use those as well. This is like a developer training course, so it's kind of getting you involved in the whole ecosystem, running web apps, sending intents, context, using channels, private channels, all that sort of stuff. And this is available now as well. If you are a platinum or a gold member of FINOS, you can take this course for free for the next few months. After that, it's going to cost $299. So yeah, get in touch if you want to take that, and I will get you connected to the Linux Foundation training team.
Great stuff. For me, having a non-technical introduction to FDC3 is also really important. We previously had one course that covered all forms of development, but with a non-technical sort of core concepts course, it's ideal for your business stakeholders, product owners, etc. People who won't be directly developing, but will be driving the development of your FDC3 integrations. So do take a look.
We were really struggling, I think, before this to have that really simple introduction, because the FDC3 website is pretty tough going, and the original course as well was expected quite a lot of you as a developer, really, before you could understand it. Whereas this one is super simple.
Indeed. For those who are going to be developing on it, we move on next to the FINOS certified FDC3 practitioner.
Yeah, so this is our practitioner exam, and well, Chris and I and various other people have been beavering away on this, writing questions for several months now, and so we actually have this proper proctored exam where you go onto a website and you have to sit in exam conditions with your webcam on and take the exam. I think Johan's been through this. Chris, I think you're scheduled to take it at some point, right? And I took it over the last week as well, even though I did write quite a lot of it. I took it just to see what the experience was like. And it is a beta at the moment, so it's quite a lot. The beta asks a lot of questions. In the final exam, it would be like 60, but the beta is more like 100 odd questions. So it does take a while and it's quite hard. But basically, yeah, if you want to help us out with this beta, that would be really great. Spread this around to your developers. It is quite a hard exam. It does require quite a good understanding of FDC3. The standard contexts and intents and sort of the reasoning behind doing things in FDC3, the way it works. But hopefully we're going to get, quite a nice, fair certification out of this. I sent an email updating people on the status of this today, so you should have all received that. The beta is going to carry on running until the 20th of November. So there's time still to schedule your beta exam and take this and get the qualification for free. Yeah, Derek, Pierre, Tim, if you haven't already, that would be a great thing to get involved with. Even Leslie at a push, I guess.
And credit where it's due, these are FINOS initiatives to help drive the uptake of FDC3. So we've had a huge amount of help from Rob and the Linux Foundation team on both the training platform and on the certification platform. Training wouldn't have come about without Vinay at Symphony's input, helping to design the courses and corral us around writing the content. We've myself and Jim Bunting at Interop.io contributed content. Hugh Troger at FactSet has contributed a huge amount, and we've had a number of other contributions, particularly on the certification front, from people across the FDC3 community. So apologies if I forgot anyone there, but thank you for all coming together to help make that happen.
Yeah, huge effort, everyone. That was brilliant work. Cheers. I'm looking forward to the beta ending now.
Final delivery. So just a bit of detail on a piece of housekeeping that we've done as part of the FDC3 Maintainers and Standards Working Group. We have updated FDC3's charter. So projects in FINOS have generally had a charter. I think it's now the language has been updated to scope, but defines what we actually address. We've updated the existing charter document and its scope, which you can see on the right-hand side, to include well-known language from the FDC3 introduction. This version didn't really introduce what we were doing at FDC3 very well. It's moved to a more positive description of, definition of the scope rather than what it doesn't include. Rather, we're focusing what it does include. We have focused on financial applications rather than financial desktop applications, as people are targeting devices as well now. Updated the application types as they've evolved, and removed some bits and pieces that related back to the original foundation of FDC3, which is more than 5 years old now and very well established, and unequivocally considered successful. So the new version should provide people a clearer introduction to what FDC3 is all about, what we do and what we don't do. For example, we don't define financial objects if they are already defined by well-known standards that we can reuse. So do take a look at that if you are interested in knowing what FDC3 covers. We have also moved FDC3 on the advice of the FINOS Foundation, something we've been talking about for a couple of 2 years now, I think. We have moved FDC3 to the community specification license. Previously, it appeared under the Apache 2 license only, and the FINOS IP policy, which was a custom license written by FINOS to help sort of govern the FDC3 as the first standards project in FINOS. 1.0 was governed by a patent agreement, then the FINOS IP policy that replaced it, and now as part of the Linux Foundation, we have moved it to the community specification license, which is a well understood license specifically designed for governing open standards using open source tooling like GitHub that we already use to collaborate. So it's better mapped to that. Past versions of the standard will do continue to come under their original licenses. Future versions will henceforth be under the CSL, with any software that the project publishes under the Apache 2 license as it was before. So what do you need to do? If you're participating in FDC3, then we'd like you to accept the community specification license. You can have a look at it. We use Easy CLA to establish that firms and individuals have a contributor license agreement. So when they contribute stuff into the standard, it becomes part of that standard along with any necessary license and IP grants. To establish that your firm has correctly accepted that and we've got it logged, we ask that you raise a PR. Now, that PR doesn't need to be merged, but that will spin up the Easy CLA tool that will check your authorization in the database. We'll throw up a notice saying you're either authorized or you're not. If you haven't done it before, you will not be authorized. And it will provide a link for you to click on to get authorized, and that will lead you through the process. For many firms, if you've already got an agreement in place, you will then be automatically authorized. Otherwise, you'll be directed through to how to handle an update to your firm's corporate CLA or an individual CLA for yourself. Any problems with that, do get in touch with either help@finos.org or FDC3-maintainers@finos.org, and we'll help you through the process. So we're moving on to what's new in FDC3 2.1. So 2.1 was actually released, was adopted by vote at the end of August and released a couple of weeks later on the 14th of September. That doesn't necessarily mean you're using it today, certainly not if you're an app developer. It has to be implemented by desktop agent providers. So there's a little work to do before your provider gives you access to a 2.1 version. It's worth noting, though, however, that changes to the desktop agent API are quite limited, and it is entirely backwards compatible, and hence your apps written for 2.0 will be compatible with 2.1. But it does provide a whole bunch of new context types and other things that you can start using today because they also work with 2.0. But the contents of 2.1 can basically be summarized as adding a fifth part to the standard, desktop agent bridging, which we'll come back to in a minute, the new context and intents, minor improvements to the API, including some clarifications like adding a minimum timeout for adding context and intent listeners, so that apps can rely on having a certain amount of time from any conformant desktop agent to get themselves set up before they have to receive data. We've added some new errors to return on a couple of API calls, specifically malformed context for handling anything that shouldn't have been passed to the API. We have made a few corrections to typing in TypeScript, for example, moving to a lowercase string type instead of a capitalized one. Won't break anything for anybody, we believe. And we've added various other documentation clarifications for people implementing support in their apps or desktop agents that should help. In the app directory API, we've done a few deprecations for things that are going away. For example, the name field that already is deprecated in the API, we're just matching those. Custom config field that isn't very usable and is due to be replaced. And intent display names, which used to cause problems because every app could give an intent a different display name and the desktop agent had to pick one. So all just tidy up. We've improved some of the documentation. We have made a correction on the new interop app channels element, which isn't in heavy use yet, and made a number of other minor corrections or improvements to the schemas. So unlikely to break things for most people, but will improve them for future users. On to a little bit more detail on the new parts of the standard, desktop agent bridging. I know a number of people will have had this before, but we didn't record that copy of the general meeting or standards working group, so we're just going to run through it again quickly. I'll make this version brief. But essentially, desktop agent bridging was something we worked through a discussion group to go into 2.1, and it was addressing certain things that FDC3 was not currently doing well. So many FDC3 adopters have internally assembled desktop suites of apps, but they have other apps that they want to interoperate with, and these sometimes are delivered in their own container. Which means you have to unpack them all, take them out of their container and bring them into your own in order to work with them in the same desktop agent. This often brings about user experience compromises that firms aren't necessarily happy with and more integration work than they wanted to do. There's also monolithic, usually non-web apps, which you might need to interoperate with. So a big .NET monolith or a vendor product that is essentially the same thing. And interaction with these is often preferred to be interop only rather than also window management, certainly by their development teams or deliverers, as it brings about a lot more work that you have to do. They may have desktop agent specific .NET or Java interop APIs that they end up currently having to use, and that can stall the integration of native apps into the interoperating desktop, which is not obviously what we want. Generally speaking, application vendors with these types of apps need a lower barrier of entry to do the integration. Many of those are existing software vendors who are keen to support FDC3, and the customers are equally keen, but the vendors are often most impacted by the lack of solutions for large native apps. Their apps are often a set of components integrated into a container of some description. So that could be just a larger, say, .NET or Java application rather than a specific container product. And they're often frequently built using .NET, Java, or other non-web technologies. The cost of implementing and maintaining those integrations and to each desktop agent vendor is often, or perhaps to a customer's proprietary desktop suite, is often too high. And as there's no specification, or previously there was no specification of a wire protocol for FDC3, this was difficult and costly. So adding that into FDC3 was intended to significantly lower that cost to integrate those environments with each other. Users also may have many devices, multiple PCs, phones, tablets, etc. It's common at banks and buy-side firms to already have multiple PCs, and workflows may span across those different machines or devices. And those are the most inefficient and error-prone desktop workflows because there is nothing for it but to re-enter the data or use custom tooling that will let you copy and paste across them. So users are also increasingly working remotely and from mobile devices. So To achieve the goals of FDC3, we may eventually need to cater for those devices as well. So how are firms facing this challenge? Well, FDC3 itself didn't have a good answer to any of this. Individual desktop agents from participating firms did. However, getting multiple stakeholders to agree on one of those solutions, one of those products, is a multilateral agreement. That's one of the things we're specifically trying to address with FDC3, so that you don't have to have those agreements or indeed direct lengthy integration projects. So the lack of that standard solution made it more complex, multiple solutions, incomplete solutions, perhaps bridging only channels across and not the not intents and the directed workflows they support, might lead to islands of interop on the desktop where only certain apps talk to each other. And ultimately, to solve this, it's currently a set of multilateral agreements between multiple vendors, development teams, firms, etc. And that's breaking down the hard-won value in FDC3. So easiest to summarize all of this as a vendor and an adopter's choice of desktop agent vendor should not limit their ability to interoperate with each other. So we have come up with a solution to it, which is the Desktop Agent Bridging API. It's a JSON-based wire protocol for desktop agents rather than the applications they manage to interoperate with each other. And that insulates the app and as much as possible the FDC3 API implementation from additional complexity. It's intended to connect those desktop agents together so that the apps they manage for a single user can share interop. It doesn't connect users to each other, that's not the intention, but it is intended to let the applications talk to each other without having to do any more than they do right now. The desktop agents handle the interconnection. And it can connect different devices for that same user, allowing interop to span across machines, devices, etc. As I said before, we aim to keep as much of the additional complexity in the bridge implementation as possible to ensure that this is easy to uptake for different desktop agent vendors or in-house implementations of the same. It's based on the idea of a bridge. The bridge is its own entity, sits between the desktop agents. It's not necessarily part of a desktop agent. It is owned, deployed, or configured by the end user firm. So it's running on the user's device or devices. So they have control over, for example, how it does discovery, etc., what additional logging or anything else that it does. And it effectively acts as a server, which each desktop agent is a client of. They connect to the bridge and that forwards messaging between them. It can support multi-device bridging. It's the bridge's responsibility to handle single-user multi-machine cases. It could, for example, offer plugin support to allow for customization and additional functionality. For example, a discovery service that works with your internal IT infrastructure to find your users' others' machines. And you will now find it as part of FDC3 since the 2.1 release. It is the fifth part of the standard. You'll find it from the front page. We've got a fairly lengthy overview of this. It's not necessary to go through this if you're an app vendor. This is content for desktop agent designers and builders, where they'll find details on each individual flow that's necessary to bridge. There's diagrams there for how they work, how the exchanges work, and schemas and documentation for each of the message types. So it's a very detailed addition to the standard, which should make it easy to implement. There is also a project within FINOS aiming to implement an open source desktop agent bridge to be used with any support agent that supports it, which is known as the Backplane project. It's originally developed at NatWest as a bridging solution for a couple of agents they use. It's now open source and contributed to FINOS. There's work ongoing to align it with the standard. The base has actually been in use in production on desks at NatWest Markets for a number of years now. So it's a mature technology base and it is being adapted to the far more detailed desktop agent bridging standard. So it includes the bridging service and JavaScript and .NET client libraries that are gradually being updated to support the full bridging workflows. So the other major additions in FDC3 2.1 are context, data, and intents. As I said, you can use these from today with your 2.0 desktop agent. They include workflows for CRM and chat interactions, like create interaction, view chat, view messages, send chat message. Should all be self-explanatory as to what these achieve. And we've got lots of newer updated context types. So FDC3 instrument gained some additional support for market information, thanks to a PR from Johan. We have the FDC3 chat room, which can be used to send further messages to a chat that you've created. Chat message type, which actually contains the content in the message. And we made some corrections to the object for initiating chats. There's also a transaction result object, which is intended to be used as a result from intents. And for example, those that do CRUD operations, giving you back the status of the operation. For example, I've created a new order for you, and can also wrap a result. So here is the order, and you can get its order ID to keep, to use later in your workflows. We've also created some experimental context types. These are a stake in the ground for things we know that need to be created, establishing a name for them and some basics like IDs, etc. We've heard previous feedback that if something doesn't exist in standard, that can often hold people up from getting started on it. So we want people to get started with order, trade, and product types. So they're very basic definitions handling the minimum use case, for example, IDs representing these objects, allowing them to be passed around, and basic definitions, for example, a product might relate to a security, a trade relates to a product, an order relates to a product, etc. So do start to use these, do extend them, and feedback to us on what else you think they need. So with that, we'll move on to what's next for FDC3 for the next standard version, be that 2.2 or 3, yet to be decided. But the major parts of it are already proposed. The first being that's supporting FDC3 in web browsers. This means supporting a number of new use cases for FDC3. It has always supported web technologies, but primarily aimed at container products. And some of the issues for working in a straight web browser are quite different, as you have a different level of access as the desktop agent implementation to what you might be able to do, tracking a window, for example, knowing what's been started, etc. So, as I said, it's always been about web technologies in a container or browser extension where you can do injection. So, for example, the standard requires that you put the FDC3 API up on the window object. That we can't do automatically in a web browser without a library import. Now, products and use cases, including some from my own firm, have been appearing that use FDC3 in a browser already without an extension. And that's important because not everybody is investing in the desktop or a container, or if they have, it takes time to get added to them. Part because you can get applications added to them, in part because there's not as many trusted app directories out there containing them as we'd like to see. And also users generally, particularly traders in capital markets, move on quickly. So it is really important to get new users started, for example, in a web browser, without the sort of drop-off experience asking for an application install. Always much harder to get something installed directly on somebody's machine. So we've got new use cases. The existing use case, as I said, was containers or browser extensions, and these are use cases purely for web applications. What we have as new use cases, though, are those that were spawned by a web-based desktop agent. So perhaps a launcher window that is spawning child windows or creating frames within windows in which to load web applications. There might also be independently started web applications. So you might, in the first use case, you might have gone to a launcher. The second use case, you might have gone directly to an application. So we're also looking to address how those independently opened web applications can get started, whilst also supporting being started by something else. And lastly, there is something we're calling a micro front-end container, which is basically a web window that is containing multiple other apps that are running in the same DOM. So not iframes, which have separate DOMs, but those running directly in the same window. FDC3 can't usually be used for these to communicate with each other because it doesn't deliver messages back to the same source. And if it's running in the window, it considers the whole window to be the source. So we're looking at how we can evolve the desktop agent API so you can retrieve additional instances for individual widgets to be able to talk to each other, resolve intents, raise intents, etc. And be able to do so under any conformant desktop agent. So what do we do? Well, where the FDC3 API can't be injected, you might currently have to incorporate a proprietary module into the apps, but this comes with a few risks: breaking changes for existing apps, vendor lock-in and publishing of multiple app builds, because if you want to work with multiple desktop agent vendors, you'll need to include different libraries and work out which one at which time. And ultimately, that might result in a fractional, fragmented ecosystem, which is not the goal of the FDC3 standard. It's not compatible with our charter. So to support new use cases and avoid breaking the FDC3 ecosystem, what we're working on in that group is formalizing new ways to get at the FDC3 API that are easy to use, backwards compatible for existing implementations, and will allow future innovation in the design of desktop agents. We want to be able to preserve the ability to write once and run anywhere for FDC3 app developers, not which you can do, for example, for containers at the moment with the injected types, but moving into the browser, that hasn't been immediately possible. So that's one of the key things we're trying to fix. And ultimately, because we're looking at browser windows and users can move them around, they can go backwards and forwards, they can enter new addresses. We're also looking to be able to better establish and monitor the identity of an application. That was a lot easier for a container to do with more detailed access to the machinery underlying the browser or container. And we need different techniques for doing that, a bit of more formal establishment of identity of an application when running in a browser. So where are we at with it? We've agreed the use cases and terminology, and we have some relatively complete proposals produced for a pan-use case FDC3 access function for the web that we could put in the FDC3 NPM module. This is expected to become the preferred way that you get at the FDC3 API, as it will support any of the use cases, including the existing ones. We've agreed the outline of a web connection protocol with a fair bit of detail. That's implemented through window.postMessage, and that will handle connection to the browser-based desktop agents and includes some initial identity validation and support for a wide variety of desktop agent implementations. There's multiple different ways you can work with it, depending on how you're building your desktop agent, whether it's running locally, has a launcher window, works in a web worker, or even remotely on a server somewhere. We've also established a browser communication protocol. Once you've connected, you need to be able to talk to the desktop agent for each API call or event you're receiving. That's based on the JavaScript channel messaging API and is for use with the desktop agent running in another window or frame, or a proxy to it if it's running somewhere else that's running in the window or frame for you. And we have an API proposal for retrieving additional FDC3 API instances to support the widgets and sub-applications. This is slightly different, but built upon the same procedures that we've agreed for the other. So they are using the same bricks to build those walls. We've achieved consensus that the current proposals are workable and secure. So our next steps are essentially to squeeze out the last few pips, which include methods for handling channel selection, UIs, and intent resolvers. These are often wrapped around windows or injected into them, but for some types of desktop agent implementation, we may need to have an open source solution to these. We are then need to move on to drafting the additions to the FDC3 standard and raising the PRs for those, and ultimately present the proposals to the standards working group for validation. So we've done a lot of the analysis work, we've done a lot of the talking, we've agreed solutions. We now have a lot of work to do in order to produce the standard documentation for that. And a related discussion group, as we'll identify, is the new identity and threat modeling discussion group. At the FINOS members meeting back in May 2023, there was a roundtable discussion, and indeed at the previous meeting the year before, on identity. And we determined there's a bunch of different types of identity in FDC3. There's the identity of an app, the identity of a desktop agent, an app directory, and a user. And each of these would at some point need to be able to validate or potentially to share the identity of one of the other entities. For example, a desktop agent may need to work with user identity for login, etc. Or sharing. A desktop agent already needs to work with the identity of an application, and that's very lightly handled in FDC3 at the moment. Applications may need to identify each other. FDC3 was originally designed for very open, anonymous interop, but we've had lots of feedback from the industry that that's not workable for everybody, and that they need more information about where requests for workflow steps are coming from, or context is being shared, or indeed who they are going to share it to. So it's considered really important for the long-term uptake of FDC3 that we do some more on this. And ultimately, the last one, that can get very laborious, constantly establishing identity. So we may need some level of trust with the desktop agent in order for it to mediate the identity exchanges. So that brings us back to app to desktop agent identity. So lots to think about there. The community is recruiting expert contributors for this working group. We need to ensure participation from experts in security and identity and access management, to ensure that best practices and relevant external standards are applied to any solution that we propose. We have established a leader for the group. So new FDC3 maintainer Yannick Malins from Symphony, who is a veteran of their own identity and authentication solutions, is convening and running the group, which first met on the 12th of October and focused on discussions of threats and weaknesses in FDC3's handling of app and desktop agent identity, which, as I said, are somewhat exacerbated by the move into web browsers. We need more there. The next meeting of the group is Thursday the 9th, so a couple of days away. Do come along to join the discussion, or if you want to get involved or want a colleague to get involved, also feel free to email us at fdc3-maintainers@finos.org, and we'll see what we can do to get you set up. We also, in our next steps, want to do some things with context and intent. And I know we're running short of time here, but I'm going to hand you over, if you're ready for me to do so, Vinay, just for a few quick words on that.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. So in terms of the governance of context data and intent, if we look at the current release cycle for FDC3, we're really looking for a way to enable kind of more features in the standard in a quicker format, instead of being reliant upon a particular release kind of instant version. So based on that, we need a different way to govern new introductions for context and intents being introduced, and still go through a governance process for inclusion, but maybe they are kind of released earlier in a separate NPM module that could be experimental before they are actually included in official versions. So working through the governance process, we kind of are close to a draft proposal in terms of what should be published. We have covered aspects of including a standard type, but also proprietary type. So this allows you to kind of catalog types that you may have internally, but not necessarily publish them externally. So in terms of the proposal, we're seeking to have a separate governance of context and intent types from the APIs, and this would kind of sorry. So this would then allow us to introduce these new types periodically and not be heavily dependent on kind of API release versions. And we'd look to create a separate NPM module as soon as these types are actually merged into, once they've been submitted and approved, that they should be available to kind of end users to actually start testing its capabilities. And this would then allow kind of users to actually test and confirm it's working as it should do, or iterate and make changes should they be required. And after that process, we would then kind of seek approval to be officially added to an official kind of release version. So we have a solution. We can distribute. I believe we're kind of sending these slides out as well. So there's a link to the proposal. As part of this proposal, what we're doing is we're introducing the JSON schema definitions. So what this does, it not only introduces the type, but also contains documentation which supports the type and how to interact and use it. I know Chris has done a lot of work here already. What we're looking for now is kind of support from volunteers really to help with the next steps of actually turning this proposal into a working solution. So kind of the JSON schema files are there. How do we then start to leverage these and turn them into documentation? And also around the process, how can we automate the process of submission as well to try to make it low touch as possible, to then have a process to generate these NPM modules afterwards as well.
So if you're any good with Docusaurus sites, JSON schema rendering tools, very similar things to OpenAPI and Redoc if you've used those before, GitHub Actions, TypeScript module builds, etc., or module builds for other languages, we want to hear from you because we are looking for contributors.
Yep. So I was just going to add, Chris. So it may not necessarily be yourself. You could have someone in your organization that could be suitable to kind of support us on this as well. So feel free to nominate them as well.
We'll have another word on that in a minute. Another really important thing that we are looking to do is bring FDC3 bindings for multiple languages into the standard. Now, these at the moment, main interfaces are defined in TypeScript with JSON schema for the context objects. However, FDC3 was always intended to be implemented in other languages and has been done, and many firms have done so in their products. So there are bindings out there already in .NET, Java, Python, and even a few other languages. So we're looking to add standard bindings for those other languages to FDC3. We have some contributions already waiting in the wings on that front. So, for example, the Morgan Stanley team have already raised a repository that we might migrate in to become the standard definitions. And we will be looking to bring in documentation into the main website as well. So for anyone implementing in future, making sure they use the same signatures, meaning code is more interchangeable between different vendors than it is right now. There will be an additional maintenance burden to bringing this in. So we are looking to recruit more maintainers for those different languages. Although it should be noted that after the initial integration, the maintenance burden is mostly required on new standard versions, which tend to come out on a roughly annual basis. So not a big burden. If you are working in one of those languages, we definitely want to hear from you because we would like to get your input into the standard. There's a few other proposals for the next version of FDC3 and some very good contribution opportunities there. We've got a number of different things to do with the documentation. For example, we've done a lot more work on use cases and technical use cases for FDC3, which is not described in the FDC3 docs, but does now appear in the training material, so it could be brought in. We've got some basic page updates to do, for example, bringing conformance testing into the compliance pages. So there's a straight off link there for people who are implementing desktop agents. We've got, as we said, generating documentation pages from JSON schema definitions, which will reduce the amount of duplication you have to do when bringing stuff into the standard and make it more maintainable, easier to extend. And improving the AppD's documentation with Docusaurus plugins to render OpenAPI. There's a bunch of other proposals out there on the API. A couple of high points are saving and restoring state, common thing to do in a desktop agent implementation. Allowing apps to join multiple channels. I think it's the oldest issue on the books. We've never got it done, but we do occasionally hear from firms that absolutely have to have it in their use cases, and the APIs don't currently support it. So tell us about it if you want to see that. There's also things to do on project infrastructure, context and intent proposals, always more to add there to support use cases. If you are ever not finding what you need to support your use case in FDC3, then come and tell us about it, because we need a proposal. These things are never secret source, and you can generate a sort of ecosystem effect where other things will just work with your app by putting them into the standard. So come and see us about that. And finally, we've got a bit more refinement to do on the AppD, which will probably also pick up some things from the identity and threat modeling group, as it is FDC3's sort of app registry standard. So if we have to put identity information in, some aspect of that will be related to the app directory. So you can always share your own proposals with the community via fdc3@finos.org, or more directly by raising an issue on the FDC3 GitHub project. That's how we collaborate. So please feel free to go ahead and do it. If you're not sure about raising an issue, you can, of course, start a discussion or even hop onto our Slack. So if you're looking for how to start getting involved, go straight to the FDC3 repository and have a look at the Getting Involved section of the README, as it's got all the info that you will need. And with that, if you are looking to just get started in the meetings, we've got a number of meetings upcoming. This Thursday is the Identity and Threat Modeling discussion group, starting at 11 AM in the US or 4 PM in London. FDC3 for the web is the following Thursday. Desktop agent bridging is the Wednesday after that. Thursday the 23rd for the standards working group meeting. And then the 7th of December is our next context, data and intent meeting. If you want all the meeting details to appear on your calendar, then email help@finos.org, who will send you invites for them all. Although my pro tip is don't turn down meeting invites, just don't accept them if you're not coming, as they can drop off your calendar if you reject them. And lastly, we receive a huge amount of support from FINOS, many of it coming packaged as Rob Moffat, who's been helping us with all sorts of things over here. But like most open source projects, we are run by volunteers primarily. So we're looking for participants to raise issues, tell us what you need, participate in the meeting, raise PRs to do things. There is also an editor, one currently, for the FDC3 standard. We would always like to appoint more. Their job is to review things going into the standards with quality and to ensure they match the decisions of the standards working group to hold to our governance. So that's currently a huge contribution from Hugh Troger at FactSet, who is essential to us getting anything done at the moment, and we would like to support him with more editors. It's a great role to put on a CV, for example, being an editor for a well-known, well-thought-of industry standard. So if you or a colleague is ready to do that, then please come forward. And likewise, we always need maintainers as well. They are responsible for organizing activity, for example, chairing meetings, handling parts of our governance, but also to maintain the project's infrastructure, code, and documentation. We're always happy to take help from participants and standard contributors. But if you really benefit from FDC3 on a regular basis, consider appointing a maintainer and giving them some, proposing a maintainer, I should say, and giving them some amount of hours that they can spend, say, on a monthly basis, helping to maintain the project. Even if they're not a specialist in FDC3, there is lots to do in terms of project infrastructure, as we've covered. And as we're taking on a number of new goals, the standard is expanding. This is really important right now for us to help achieve our goals. So do get in touch with FDC3-maintainers at finos.org to nominate yourself or a colleague to get started, and we'll work with you to get you appointed and up to speed.